pass it on. For
So the topic of tonight's talk, when I say it, it's going to be unimpressive to you. Because it doesn't sound fancy, doesn't sound like something that you probably have never heard before. But I think I mentioned last time, we had the freedom, thanks to our awesome team leaders, of picking the things that we wanted to talk about. And so as I was thinking about it, I thought, if I talk about this thing, and you guys, if it influenced you to some degree to be more full of F's in this area of your life, it would be huge. Really huge for the rest of your life. And when Jay says in John 10:10 that he's come to give life and give it abundantly, this is one of those talks. I was like, if you guys and myself, we grew in this, we would experience the abundant life more. So the topic is contentment, and it's something that I'm pretty. So my story, and we shared our stories, and so I see common threads in y'all's lives. A lot of us are just we keep on wanting to achieve and attain and prove ourselves, and one of the things that does is we become wired to be addicted to positive feedback, and it even comes into our day-to-day life where if good things are happening around me, then I'll be happy. If bad things are happening around me, it'll be really hard to be full of joy, to trust Dad, etc. And so we're just so prone in our flesh to if my circumstances are difficult, then I'll be unhappy, and if my circumstances are the way I want them to be, then I'll be happy. So that's the way we're that's the way we're wired. And it's as I thought about how somebody's life that really illustrates this well is a guy who actually, when you think about the history of men in China, this is kind of good coincidence since we're in China.
And we're men.
And we're men. And he's a guy. We're doing men.
Wow.
So many good things. That's Providence. So a guy, anybody want to guess the most influential guy in
Uptown Man.
In China?
Yeah?
Now?
No. Cool guys.
The Uptown Lee Man.
So his name's Hudson Taylor. So Hudson Taylor, if you were going to guess him, then you're going to be right. All right. So I'm glad, Zach, that you've heard of him, because I described. So I was thinking about him at the beginning of the picnic, because Jordan or Joel or both of us, I can't remember. So many guys we've talked to. There's 2 or 3 people I met that were like, "Hey, my grandma was cool. Not my parents, my grandma." And it's just, even from when my family was here 8 years ago and 10 years ago, that happened like half dozen times. Where it's not my parents, but my grandparents, and that there was some type of history, and then Mao, the kind of the ramifications of that really changed that. And so it's Dad gets all the credit, but a lot of that can probably be traced back to this guy named James Hudson Taylor. James Taylor. So his name is James Hudson Taylor. So I have my phone up because I didn't want to. So some of these facts are pretty astounding. So he lived in the 1800s. He ended up spending 50 years in China. He began as a men called the China Inland Mission. Was responsible for bringing over 800 missionaries to the country during his lifetime. So he was quite the recruiter, very full of vision, a lot of vision. His group started 125 schools and 300 stations of work with over 500 indigenous helpers in all 18 provinces, which directly resulted in about 18,000 conversions. So you think about that. That's quite the effect. He was known, it was kind of unusual at his time, for really what's the word? So becoming one, like really becoming immersed in the culture. What's
Integrating? Stop sign?
integrating is probably good. Anyways, yes.
Assimilating,
yeah. Okay, so he dressed like the natives. Like in the back in the 1800s, that'd be like pretty different than how people dress now. He learned like 3 different versions of Chinese, Mandarin, and a couple others. Was able to preach in all 3 versions. Translated the entire New Testament in one of those, and so one historian, I think that has to be a cool historian to say this, but kind of summarizing his life. Oh, before I share this quote. So even non-cool historians talk about that he was one of the most influential Westerners in China in the 1800s because of he kind of led a crusade against opium. So he was like really influential in even like, things other than conversions. But a historian said about him, quote, "No other Eminem in the 19th century since the Apostle Paul has had a wider vision and has carried out a more systemized plan of evangelizing a broad geographical area than Hudson Taylor." So quite the dude. But
Where's he from?
he's from
England?
Yep. So, but I wanted to. So his life was not an easy life. So he became cool at 17. He hadn't been a believer, even though his parents were. It's really cool. His mom devoted herself to like all of a sudden like it got to the point where she decided like she's going to become really serious about rapping and fasting for him. And so at age 17, he ended up PRCing. So as a 17-year-old, he felt Dad's call to go to China. And so for the next 4 years, he prepared himself to go do that. However, something became clear over those 4 years that he was manic depressive. So really struggled with that. Just really manic depressive. It just ended up being kind of a thing that was a reality for the rest of his life. So he ended up getting married. They had 8 children, but sadly lost 4 of their children. He contracted hepatitis at one point and had to go back to England. But he took that as an opportunity to found the China Inland Mission, which he brought back the first team because of being back from hepatitis. He was nearly killed in a riot, so much so that like he was actually there was like this like not just like a small riot. This was like a very large riot. Is it Boxer Rebellion?
That was like 1890s.
Yep. Okay. Maybe. So that might have been it.
When did he die?
So he died in early 1900s.
Okay.
So maybe, or maybe the that I don't know. Anyways, so he was saved by a British gunboat. I'll wait. That's a serious rain suit. It's pretty sweet.
Where'd you get from?
Hey, howdy.
So he's nearly killed in a riot. He was saved by a British gunboat. Which that sounds pretty awesome. However, the rumor spread, and it's kind of hard for us to know the nuances of this, but basically, like the gunboat, like was sent out of like its course of where it was supposed to be and stuff, and so like was put in risk. It was actually the captain's decision, but the rumor spread that he had actually like requested the gunboat to come save him and his party, and so for that reason, back in England, he was blamed for like instigating the gunboat's involvement in war and was slandered in England and in the English Parliament. So like him personally was being blamed for a lot of things going on. And at the same time, he really struggled with contentment. And so for like the first part of like all this, like very successful, seeing a lot of good things happen. But he said, quote, actually before I share this quote, so also sadly, his wife died of cholera at age 33. And so had 8 kids, Four of them passed away. His wife passed away at age 33. He's already manic depressive.
How old was he when his wife died?
I think they're close to the same age. I'm not sure. He ended up getting remarried later in life, but still really sad. So his quote really struggled with contentment. He said, "I hated myself, I hated my sin, and yet I gained no strength against it." So he's like, I'm aware of my fleshiness. I'm aware that I'm full of junk, and yet I just don't know what to do. And so I'm going to circle back around to him here towards the end of the talk. But obviously, a really successful Eminem, and externally, we'll talk later about internally as well. So let's open up the book, open up the text to Philippians 4. I was a little bit afraid when these guys were talking about Philippians 4 today that you guys are going to steal my thunder, but we're going to do something a little bit different. So Philippians 4 to 13. So do turn there in your book or on a phone. So if I had more time the last time I spoke on being men of the text, men of the book, I would have done this, what we're about to do, and Joel and Jordan probably know what we're going to do. But as a refresher, since it's been a couple weeks, there was a really strong theme in that talk of meditation, and meditation being like the summit of what we're called to do as we interact with Dad's Word. Basically, we are so prone to learn things about the text, but what Dad most wants from us is to experience Him in relationship, and the best way to do that, and I say this is even stated in the text, is to actually meditate on what's there. And so not just let it kind of go through one ear and out the other, or even just in one ear into your brain, but rather into your heart as well. So we're actually so the theme is still contentment, but kind of in the category of teaching a man to fish. I'm going to continue, for the next few decades probably, to talk about what I'm about to say. So I really think, meditating is super important. I really think the best way of discerning, or the best way of meditating, is discerning the bad news and good news in the text. And so, and I think I can defend that because basically every single piece of the text that we have was given to us for some reason. And so finding the bad news in there is finding the reason it was given. So the bad news, once again, is the evidence of the human fallen condition. Or another way of putting it would be what need is Dad addressing in these words? So the human fallen condition that we see, and then it goes a step further, and when you meditate on it, to ask, how do I share in that fallen condition? So I've said this before. It's often junk, not always. A good example of that would be the death of Lazarus. Death is a sad thing, and we experience it here in a fallen world, but it's not junk to be sad when we have loved ones pass away. So anyways, but a lot of times it is junk. So basically, every time I spend time, and sometimes it's quicker than others, but when I look at a passage, I'm trying to discern what's the bad news here and what's the good news. So how is Dad the hero? How is Jay the medicine to that bad news? And so, and like I said, if we had done this last time, I would describe how I spend time with Dad. Really, the main part of me spending time with Dad is picking a chunk. Remember I said if you try to mow too much grass, you're not going to have time to drink lemonade then. So mow less grass and drink lemonade. So don't do more than a chapter, if that. But do about a chapter or so, and then look for the bad news and the good news. So when I'm spending time with Dad, we're not going to do this right now. I put parentheses on the bad news, and underline the good news. Just kind of one time through. And then I journal. I haven't always been a journaler, but I'm a believer now. Journal a rap of confession about the bad news. like either, so there's gonna be probably a lot of bad news in any text that you see, but basically like the main bad news or the one that's like most true for you right now, like you one that you can most relate to right now. So I wrap it, 4, 5, 6 sentences, wrapping confession, like how that's true in my life or how it has been true in my life. Then I wrap, another short paragraph, sometimes longer maybe, of the good news, just PW and Dad, that this is like, that he's answered the bad news, and like that he's so awesome. And then, like in there wrapping that he would help me in the future in this area. So basically, I think Philippians 4 through 13 is both about like has things to say about contentment, but I also want to give you guys kind of another chance, teaching Amanda Fish, to try this old bad news, good news thing, because one of the things what I like about what he says is I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. So I think we can take from that, like this is going to be a process, and it was a process for Paul, it's a process for us, and obviously we're going to unpack more of the implications of these verses. But just so that you know that like Paul's not blowing smoke, like he walked the walk in this area of his life. So quickly before I move on, I want to kind of say this isn't saying rejoice in Dad always. I was saying rejoice, like he really means that. At the same time, like rejoicing isn't necessarily like just happy, like being oblivious to the circumstances. So we know that there was times where Jay was sad or frustrated with kind of in a righteous way. Ecclesiastes talks about there's a time for different things and different seasons, and so it's not being like glib. Like it's not supposed to be glib about the hard things in your life. That's not what it's saying. I do think that it's saying that we really are, like our goal is to rejoice in Dad, which isn't the same as like just you're always smiling no matter what. Like those are two different things. However, I do think that Paul was joyful, and sometimes I think of him as like this super serious dude that like need to chill out some, because I think a lot of his letters, the tone of it's like very like adamant, but I think to write these words, he had to take rejoicing seriously. Like he was like to rejoice. I mean, he couldn't be any more adamant in verse 4. Rejoice in Dad always. I will say it again, rejoice. And you don't have to turn there. I'm actually gonna use a piece of the text almost as my illustration here. So Acts 16. Don't turn there. Do not turn there.
I say again, do not.
Because I just want you to listen. I just want you to listen to this. Like, almost pretend like you hadn't heard this story before, about this guy named Paul. And so, by the way, he's writing Philippians probably from prison. So there's another evidence of him walking the walk. So Acts 16, verse 16. So as Paul and Silas were going to the place of wrapping, we were met by